coming today. I hope that this will be beneficial to you. We are going to start the meeting right now. I just want to make a quick sound check. If somebody could either use the chat button or shoot me an email just to make sure you can hear me okay. I do have all of you muted. I apologize for that, but it will be a lot less annoying when there's no background sound. So anyway, I think everybody can, it sounds like several people can hear me, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks again for showing up today on this call. I hope it'll be beneficial to you. We are going to talk briefly about cash flow plans, and we're not going to get into the detailed mechanics of how to put one together, but we're going to go through the framework of what it means, and we're going to walk through the steps to do it. And then I think you'll be able to get a pretty good feel for what's involved and whether or not it's something that you need to do. To start off with, if you have questions throughout this, please, you can use the chat button or you can shoot me an email and I will answer the questions at the end. If I think it's too specific for you, then I will address it with you separately after the recording is done. But if it's something I think is beneficial to everybody, then yeah, I would love to have whatever questions you have, or especially if there's clarifications on something I said. To start off with, I did send all of you 3 handouts earlier today, and you don't necessarily need them, but I thought it might be easier to have handouts as opposed to trying to show things on screen, because we might get into some specific, there's some details in some of the handouts that are kind of small, and I thought it'd be easier this way. The handouts, though, are really, one is just a summary of a cash flow of what we're going to talk about today. It's the cash flow plan. It's a mind map. And so you might have that in front of you if you have it, and we'll sort of walk through this. The other one is a sales conversion cycle, and we're going to get into that a little later. And then the third one is an actual cash flow plan using a sample company that just running out numbers for 12 months. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute as far as what that means, because this is something that a lot of small business owners haven't really done, or they don't know what it looks like. And so this is a way of doing it. So let's just talk about, why do we need a plan? And this current pandemic has just opened up all sorts of cash issues and liquidity issues for the government, small business, churches, nonprofits, everybody. There are a few businesses that are surviving and thriving in this environment, but their business models, even them, they're going to be changed going forward. And so what we want to look at with a cash flow plan is, we're really getting back to basics. Where does the cash come from? Where does it go? And what is the timing on that? And timing is really critical here, because we can control some timing, and we can use that as a lever for helping us survive, because all of us are going to be tested over the next 12 months. Some of you are tested severely right now where your businesses are closed. Others are in business, but revenue's down a little bit. And then others are somewhere in between. And that's where we can use the timing to control where the cash is. And by looking at the timing, we also can identify areas where, okay, we know in 2 months we need to fix something. That gives us 2 months to try to figure out a way to do it. And frequently there are some options. So that's really the purpose, is just to give you some options for fixing businesses and fixing areas where we can get in trouble, because the pandemic isn't going to put businesses out of business. It's the lack of cash that is, and that's the key. And most of the businesses that are going to go out of business during this were probably struggling beforehand. Now there's some that are going to be severely tested with this, but this is where we want to just really focus on what can we control, because it's so easy to just look at this and say, oh, I don't have any control. And as a result, you give up. But you have a lot more control over things than you think. And, there's things out of your control, and that's fine. I mean, that's just the way it is. But we can start doing some things. So let's just talk about that third handout, the cash flow plan. What that is basically, it's 5 pages. First 2 are balance sheet. And this just ran out for 1 year, but you really should run it out for 2 or 3 years. And this is a method of looking at where you're going to be financially a year from now. And it's just about playing it forward. And that's where we're going to use the balance sheet. And then the income statement is just and this is frequently going to look a lot like your budgets. And so what that is going to be is a presentation of what you think is going to happen in the future. And then the last page is the cash flow part. And this is like, how do we convert our net income to cash? And that's the part that we don't think about as much. Do we collect receivables a little faster than we otherwise would? Or do we slow down our payment of our payables? Just things like that can impact a lot. And some of that, like if you were going to slow down payment of payables and you knew you had a real problem 1 month, but then it was going to free up, can you go to a key vendor and say, hey, can we push you back for 2 weeks? And as long as you're talking to them in advance, a lot of people will allow you to do this because they understand what you're managing your business. So this is where we can really start fine-tuning our business. Now, we also have some short-term stuff. Some people, especially the businesses that are closed right now, they got to get through the next 2 months before things reopen. And so there's some short-term, okay, how do I get through payroll this weekend? That type of thing. And that's a little more detailed and granular. We're going to talk a little bit about one piece of software that might help with that. But those are real specific situations. Most of you on this call are not in that scenario. You're more in a situation where we got to get our business models fixed. There's changes. We got to get these things straight. We can get through the next maybe month or two, but after that, we're going to have problems because it's going to be a slower ramp up than most people think. So on that handout, again, I want to just briefly go through. The starting point is the current reality, is your balance sheet. What is your historical balance as of March 31st or December 31st? And then that is what we're going to roll forward based on the economic environment, the budget. If you've done budgets, now obviously we got to change some of this stuff, but and then we're going to go through a 3-year rolling projection, because by getting it set up right, we can then adjust. There's different levers, and we're going to talk about this a little more, but the levers are different assumptions that are made in our business. And so we want to test those and see what does it do to us. So what happens if our accounts receivable goes from 30 days to 60 days? Can we handle that? And the answer is maybe. But if it's too far, it's going to put us out. So that's the basics of the plan. Let's just talk about a few foundational issues, though. What are our core assumptions? And we all have them. We're not even thinking about them. But these are also known as our blind spots, because we're not thinking about these for in the last 3 years, we may not have thought about, our accounts receivable collection other than, okay, if something's too old, we got a problem, we got to go collect it. But we haven't thought about, okay, what are we really doing? Can we change our terms on our accounts receivable so that we can move money into a earlier period? Do we collect in advance? Do we pay bills in advance? Now that sounds silly, but what happens when you pay a bill in advance? Your vendor is going to be happier, and right now, especially, they're going to be very happy. Well, they may give you favorable terms that reduce your cost. These are the things that we can start messing with our business. These blind spots are just out there, and we run all sorts of assumptions through. We think we're going to do X dollars. We don't know. There's a famous story about FedEx. When they started, they ran all sorts of marketing and projections and all this, and they thought the first week they were going to do something like 10,000 packages, whatever that number was. And so at the end of the first day that they really started working, they did 6, and they all freaked out. But what it did is they changed some assumptions. So the pilots, when they would land in a city, they would go out and make sales calls, and they focused on getting packages. And that's where we're at right now with our businesses. We have to start focusing on what are those key things. So I want you to be thinking about assumptions as we go through this here today, and then afterwards. Our cash conversion cycle is another thing that is key here. And I gave you a handout just with a real simple little flow chart of, okay, we start with marketing and leads and convert sales, to actual product. And when we actually collect it, there is a time period there that we sometimes can mess with. And sometimes it's real long. Like in my business, it might take 6 months on a sale to actually convert it to cash. Some of your businesses, it's 2 weeks or a day. But it's important to think about this because there's core assumptions in all of that. So I just wanted to lay that out there. And again, we're going through this pretty quickly, but we can come back to it later if we need to. I also wanted to talk briefly about break-even analysis, because this is, again, it's going to be a topic for future Zoom call, but we need to know what is fixed versus our variable cost. And that's a key thing here. What costs go up and down with sales, for instance? It's like your cost of goods sold would generally go up and down with sales, or the food costs in a restaurant would be up and down with sales. So but there's more of them than you think. And that's where it's a matter of figuring that out, because that helps us with trying to figure out what we're going to do with our cash. And again, we're going to get into that in more detail in another place. So what do we do here? I'm going to briefly go through how we start through a cash flow plan. And it's kind of simple, and yet it's complicated. We're going to start with your current financial condition. We need current accrual-based financials. Then we're going to say what's most likely to happen over the next year. And this is, if you have budgets, that's fine. If you don't know what to do, start with a copy of the prior year and say, okay, let's just say we duplicated that. And maybe you adjust sales by downward by 25% or something, but just to get something on paper, because trying to get it perfect is not, you can waste too much time. But what we have to do then is say, okay, what does that look like? And then we evaluate the results. And when we do that, we can identify weak spots that we say, okay, we need to mess with this a little bit more. And then this gets into documenting our assumptions. What are the assumptions? And the whole process of putting a detailed cash flow plan together, you start thinking through what those assumptions are. What am I spending on marketing? What am I spending, or how quickly am I collecting receivables? What am I doing with my salespeople as far as, am I paying commission? Is it working? And when you start thinking through this, you're really starting to tear your business apart. Then you can evaluate your strategy. Is my strategy the right one for the next year? That's a tough call right now because we don't know what's going to be. But we have to start looking at it. And just by thinking through this, even if you're wrong, you're going to be moving forward. Then we're going to decide if there's any changes to be made. And if there are, then we make them in our cash flow projections, and then we rerun it. And again, if you get this systemized, you can rerun these things fairly easily. It takes a little bit, it takes time on the setup, but then once you do it, it's pretty good. And then you reevaluate the plan. Big companies do this 4, 5, 10 times. I mean, it's a lot. Smaller businesses, it should be at least once or twice through, because then you can start getting into what you really want to do. So that's the basic framework for putting it together. Obviously, you need software in this case. I mean, you can do it by hand, but that'd be way too hard. There's different pieces out there. You can do it on an Excel file. The sample plan that I gave you earlier was using a software called Plan Guru, which we use with clients, and it works pretty well because once we get it set, we can make changes. There's another tool that I've recently learned about. It's called Cash Flow Tool, and it's really designed for short-term cash evaluation. And I haven't used it. I know some other CPAs that have, and it's really designed for what's the next 6 months, and it's designed to tie into QuickBooks or something, or software like that. And so that might be another option to look at. But having the right software or the framework is critical. The other part is having the right advisors, and obviously I can be part of that, but also your banker. Sometimes your investment advisor. There's sometimes a retired business guy that's a friend of yours. Whatever it is, different people have some expertise in this area, and whoever you use as your advisor, that's something that getting the right people around is critical. And then the last but not least is having the right team. Getting your management team together. Sometimes some businesses use open book, sharing some goals with your whole team. How can we improve cash flow? It's amazing where ideas come from. So that's where I think if you really focus on getting more people involved, because that also helps identify your core assumptions, and especially the blind spots. And this is where I can't emphasize this enough, because frequently in those blind spots, that's where the gold is. And it's just something that once you start looking at it and you figure out, I've got a core assumption on how I have to do business. And once you change it, it's like, oh, yeah, I didn't need to do that. And boom, you're good. So that is something to just think about, is to get as many people involved as appropriate. It depends on the size and everything else. So that's the core. I ran through this really quickly, but that is the core of what I wanted to cover today, is give you an overview of why this is important, the basics on putting it together, and what you can do with it. So with that, I just wanted to ask, any questions, please throw them at me now, either through the chat or through an email, and I will answer as many of them as we can. So I see I have a couple here. The one is, what if I only have cash basis financials? Can I still do a cash flow plan? This is a great question. So yeah, you can do a cash flow plan. I think it's at one level it's easier, but it's kind of hard too, because if you have a cash basis financial, but say you're in a service business, and you're, like my business, you're billing for services. You have to be thinking, when am I going to bill? When am I going to provide services? When am I going to collect it? So you're you're kind of converting it back to a accrual basis thought process, because I have to know when I'm going to do this services, and then when am I going to pay my bills, and then when am I going to um, collect for this. And maybe you collect up front, maybe, all those things are variables. But the point is, you still have to be thinking about accrual, or at least when these things are incurred, because that is going to impact our cash. So it still can be done. It just requires some additional complications there. I sort of like starting from the accrual basis, just because then I can look at my balance sheet and say, what is my assumption on each one of these items? And it's a little, for me, it's a little cleaner. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Any other questions? Everybody's too quiet. I know I ran through this really quickly, so I'm guessing that somebody else has something that they're afraid to ask. But what is the software you're referring to for short cash flow projections? That is that cash flow tool, is the actual name of the software. And you can get it on, you can just, if you just search for cash flow tool, it's by Finnegan or something like that, or Finnegraph, something like that. And anyway, that is the main tool that could be used for the real short term. Like I said, I think it only goes up to 6 months. I might be wrong on that, but any other questions? I didn't do that good of a job of explaining this stuff, I know. So, okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I mean, we can, like I said, it's about we're 25 minutes into this, and I wanted to keep it at about a half hour anyway. But you might think of something later. It's like, okay, just mulling this around, and please email me, and I can I'll get back to you. Now all of a sudden a few people are uh, are sending me something. One is, what if you're a seasonal business? How can I predict cash flow? That's a great question. You have to look at the history on your business. Software like Plan Guru, and they can factor that in. And so you do have to go back and look at historical information, because that will help you predict the future. It's still, I think the seasonal part with the current environment is going to be really difficult. Because like a restaurant in downtown St. Louis that might have great business from April through October, this year there may not, because it's going to change. So these are just some of the other current environment things that we have to think about. And another question is, what's the first step we should take? I think the first step is really saying, I just need to do this. And what I would do is, if you think you have somebody, in your organization can do it, that's great. You have a controller or somebody that can do this, that's great. But if not, call me, talk to your banker, see what you need to do, but get that advisor first, because they can help you save a lot of time and get you focused on what you really need to be doing. And I think that was about it. Any other last questions? Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. And then I will be sending a copy of this out to everybody. And you can, like I said, share it with whoever you would like that in your organization that you think might benefit from this, because it is something you do need to get buy-in. And it's the other part of the first step is if you are working with, say you got a partner or a boss or a key employee, you need to get buy-in on doing something like this, because it takes some time and you have to get everybody focused on the same thing. So with that, one last, yeah. Somebody just asked, are we going to cover how to calculate break even in a future webinar? Yeah, I do plan on covering that in a future Zoom call. My thought is, just so you know, next week, I'm planning on doing these every Friday. Next week, the call will be on doing a SWOT analysis. This is another, again, little different way of looking at where we're vulnerable and looking at core assumptions. And so it fits in with doing this cash flow plan. So that's my plan for next week. And then somewhere in the future, or near future, I am going to go over calculating break even, because that is something that every business really needs to know where they need to be. So anyway, I think that's it. So I want to thank you all for attending, and like I said, I'll send out the note in a little bit. Thanks again.